has contributed to the wider Scottish economy?
I think ironically it's actually contributed to the wider British economy more than it has the Scottish economy. For many years, obviously, oil and gas revenues have been coming out of Aberdeen, and especially in the 70s and 80s, they were used to actually bail the UK out of its cash crisis back then. And I think there's been actually not enough reinvestment in Aberdeen. I think that's kind of held Aberdeen back. So I don't think it's necessarily been contributing to the overall Scottish economy, except for the fact in terms of, well, the revenues haven't, but except for the fact that it has obviously been a catalyst for major expertise in energy, offshore oil, etc. And I think that in itself, and inward investment as well, has actually contributed to the Scottish economy in terms of how it's viewed as a vibrant international economy. And obviously, oil is traded in dollars, so overall the amount of foreign currency that it brings in, again, to the UK economy has been absolutely vital to the UK, to supporting the UK's economy through tough times. But if you look at what's actually happened in Aberdeen, the reinvestment hasn't been there. Other countries have no oil whatsoever, and yet they've got lots of oil refineries. We just have one in Scotland. It's a pretty big one, but just one. And there just hasn't been as many jobs created as a direct result of the constitutional situation that Scotland's in. Many people who work offshore come from outside of Scotland, and their tax is registered outside of Scotland. And many of the companies that are actually extracting oil and gas from the North Sea, they manage their taxes, shall we say, efficiently, so that it doesn't actually necessarily strengthen Scotland's economy overall as well. So although the oil and gas sector has been extremely good for the economy overall, we just haven't maximised it, certainly nowhere even close to how Norway's maximised their oil and gas assets. Well, I think that there's one particular difficulty that Aberdeen's faced, and that is bad management of the economic policies towards oil and gas extraction. If you actually look at how Westminster has actually managed the oil and gas sector over the years and compare that to, say, Norway, so Stavanger hasn't actually seen massive falls in its economy. It hasn't, the oil price hasn't really impacted there anything like it has. So the risks that are involved in being so dependent on oil as Aberdeen is, and there's obviously many other facets to Aberdeen's economy, in Aberdeenshire in particular, and fishing, farming, these sort of things. But at the end of the day, if the oil and gas revenues are not properly stewarded by the government, then you end up in a situation where you have Aberdeen in itself, has been in a bit of a limited recession since the oil price collapse. It is starting to come back now, but other countries haven't been having the same problems because they've anticipated that oil prices are volatile. They've invested in oil funds, they've invested in new technology, they've invested in innovation, and also in terms of Norway in particular, a large percentage of the profits are actually generated by a nationalised oil company, Statoil. And if you compare that to the make money quick, cash cow attitude that the UK government's had to it, then it's that's actually caused the problem, not the dependency on oil itself, on gas itself. I think following on from my last answer, it's about the fact that the UK government hasn't reinvested in Aberdeen. It hasn't managed the oil and gas industry properly, and I think if Scotland doesn't become independent, then you can just expect more of the same. You can expect oil ministers to come and go within months rather than years or terms of parliaments. You can expect a lack of investment. You can actually expect short-termism, particularly because Brexit's going to damage the economy. There isn't going to be money floating around for anything because we're going to be paying more for things that we import in particular. There are lots of different sectors like the farming sector that are going to be looking for replacements of the grants they get, etc. So money's going to be too tight to mention, and they're already failing to invest in renewables in particular, which Aberdeen has a real opportunity to grow and transfer that energy expertise into. So as part of the union, I think the risk now, especially with Brexit, during the last independence referendum, the no side claimed that there was a great deal of risk with independence. I think that now that Brexit vote has happened, and now that the likely outcome appears to be a no-deal Brexit, then it's actually flipped. Now all the risk is with staying with the United Kingdom. And the flip side of that is that in Scotland we have a lot more awareness of environmental issues, a lot more awareness of the potential of renewables, and we should be looking to Aberdeen and actually saying, well, we've had a fantastically successful period with oil and gas. There still is another 30 to 40 years of successful economic extraction of oil and gas, but actually let's start looking to develop a technology or energy technology that will never run out, that is constantly renewable. And Aberdeen's in a fantastic opportunity, a fantastic place to take advantage of that. The UK government just doesn't feel that way. It's investing in Hinkley Point nuclear power because that's what matters to its energy security. They don't really care, I don't think, about Aberdeen. As soon as Aberdeen's revenues start to dip, then and contribution to the UK economy starts to dip, they're not going to invest in it anymore. Scotland would see that as a priority and transferring it into the next energy boom from the North Sea. I don't necessarily see that there is that much risk of independence. It's a natural state of affairs for countries. Scotland, as a nation, has the brain power, it has the sophisticated markets, it has the infrastructure, the government infrastructure, the trading infrastructure. It has a great reputation. It has expertise. And, people of Scotland are actually more educated than in any other country in Europe. We have more. 44% of us have either college or professional, vocational or university qualifications, significantly higher than the rest of the UK and significantly higher than Europe as a whole. So where is the risk? This is the thing that the people say to me, oh, you've got to be fair, you've got to accept that there is some sort of risk. The risk is staying with the United Kingdom as it self-destructs, and I think it's plain for anyone to see that it's in the process of doing that right now. For the first time ever, we have a government, which we didn't have in 2014, because the UK was kind of okay. The UK was okay. Some of us thought we saw more potential in being independent, but the risk of staying with the UK wasn't necessarily that great. A few of us did say that actually, I think that we're going to be taken out of the EU against our wishes, but that was the sum of the risk. Now we have a case study of the UK government actually promoting and following a policy which it knows full well will cost tens of thousands of people in Scotland their jobs. They know full well it will increase the cost of living. They know full well that Scottish exports will find it very difficult to get to market, especially as it's got to go a long way to Felixstowe and the Port of Dover before we actually even hit the traffic jams down there. It's following a strategy which is deliberately and aggressively going to harm Scotland's economy. And therefore we have guaranteed risk, we have guaranteed damage. Whereas as an independent nation, there will be a transition period, and that transition period might be a bit bumpy in places. But is that a risk? Or is that just the price of the opportunity of getting away from the self-destructing UK and the price of the opportunity of actually following a better path that's actually more suited to us as a nation and to our economy, with bespoke policies for our economy? What risk is there? I would now say that the risk was staying with the UK, and honestly, I could try to be fair, but I think that is fair because it's a fair assessment of the absolute mess that the UK is in right now. A lot of the time when you think about what is the opportunity from independence, we can talk in general terms. We can say, we'll look after our people better, we'll pay our pensioners more overall, and we think, we'll invest more in the NHS. And you're sort of comparing, we'll invest more in the NHS as an independent nation than we would do as part of the UK, because the UK will be controlling the budgets. And these sort of things are maybe true, but they're not specifically geographical or located to one city sort of benefits. I think Aberdeen is one of the exceptions where you can really say it's going to make a huge difference to Aberdeen. And the reason for that is that Scotland possesses 25% of the whole of Europe's offshore wind energy potential, and 25% of its tidal energy potential, and actually 10% of Europe's entire wave energy potential. Think about it as 60% of the EU's oil and gas has brought prosperity to the northeast of Scotland for quite some time. But we're talking about Europe, the entire continent here. And the expertise that Aberdeen has in offshore energy, in engineering, these sort of things, can be turned into the same expertise are transferable into renewable energy. Now, we have a climate crisis has been declared. It's not just Scotland doing this. Everyone understands that we've got to cut back on carbon emissions, and therefore we can actually invest in Aberdeen as an independent nation, and it's our values to do so. It's not the UK's values to do so. It's to our advantage to do this. We can invest in Aberdeen and turn it into a world centre of renewables generation and a world centre of renewables expertise, which we can then go and export that expertise around the world. So I think that in particular we've got an absolutely huge opportunity for Aberdeen. And the other thing about, in terms of Aberdeen, we're talking about the risk to Aberdeen. The actual risk to Aberdeen is the UK government's lack of preparation for the volatility that it's faced. The Norwegian government has about 20% of its economy is based on oil and gas, and yet they've actually thrived, generated hundreds of billions of pounds more tax revenue than the UK government does, and now they actually own an investment fund, which is one of the world's largest sovereign investment funds, and it actually controls 1.3% of all the stocks traded in the world. When you actually compare that situation to Aberdeen struggling now with a lack of investment, with job losses over the last few years, etc., it's all about the insurance that's put in place, and the UK government was more interested in milking the revenues out of Aberdeen rather than ensuring that Aberdeen had a prosperous future. Okay, so one thing I would like to do is actually address the myth that Scotland's dependent on oil, that Scotland's economy is overly dependent on oil or vulnerable to price shocks. For instance, making up about 16% of Scotland's economy, oil and gas is obviously very important to the overall mix. But the UK's economy is 33% dependent on business and financial services, largely based out of London. Now, if you look at those two, also a highly volatile sector, and if you look at the volatility that's hit those sectors, the price drop, which was worse than anyone had actually predicted, Scotland's economy overall continued to grow. Pain was felt in Aberdeen, for sure, but outside of Aberdeen, that didn't make too much of a difference, because actually the price of fuel falling actually helped other industries. Whereas if you look at what happened when we had volatility in the financial markets in 2007, well, we did have a recession. Scotland didn't go into recession when the oil price fell, but the UK went into recession as a result of the crash of the financial markets, and we haven't recovered from that. All these years later, 12 years later, we're still struggling. We still have austerity, we still have budget cutbacks, etc. So Scotland's economy is not overly dependent on oil and gas. The UK is overly dependent on financial services. Let's hope that nobody does anything stupid like leaving the EU and losing all financial passporting, because that could be a bit of a problem. Norway is 20% dependent on oil and gas overall, which is a lot more than Scotland. But if you actually add the top three sectors together, Norway's top three sectors make up 50% of its economy. Scotland's top three sectors make up 52% of its economy. And the UK's top three sectors make up 57% of the economy. So actually the UK is the least diverse economy of those three countries, the one that's most dependent on one highly volatile sector. So although I would encourage investment in renewables and making Aberdeen a world centre for renewables technology, because we got lucky once in the North Sea and the UK wasted that opportunity, we've got lucky again. Let's invest in it, let's make it a real opportunity for Aberdeen and for the overall Scottish economy now. I am really excited by the idea of the People's Assembly, and I think we need a second house. I don't think we need to build another Parliament building and fill it with unelected lords for sure, but I actually think what we should do is find a good structure that actually travels the country and acts as a second house and a sounding board, etc., getting people from all different walks of life in it, etc. And I would see Aberdeen as being one of the places where that would sit on a regular basis. I think that the other thing is that my studies of small, independent European nations in particular goes to show that the smaller nations, especially where there are large chunks of the economy, because Aberdeen's oil and gas sector has in the past mattered to the UK, but it doesn't matter that much now, and as a result it's not getting the investment. It would always matter to a Scottish government, and the opportunity for renewables would always matter to a Scottish government, and therefore it's going to be at the heart of economic policy planning in Scotland, whereas it's an afterthought or even not even thought about in Westminster. But smaller nations with tighter, more open, shorter, more open lines of communication with government tend to actually not have that problem. The reason people ask that question is because we live in the UK, and the UK has that problem. And people say, oh yes, but cities, capital cities always pull together towards all the power. Does Canberra overwhelm Sydney in Melbourne? Does Washington kill the economy of New York and Chicago, of California? You know, there are so many countries out there. If you actually look at Italy, Italy is about the sixth largest GDP per head. Rome is the sixth largest GDP per head in Italy. There are many cities that actually outperform capital cities around the world, but because London has a strategy of pulling towards it all the wealth, all the power, all the opportunities, we fear centralisation. What we actually fear is the thing we're about to move away from, and that is the failed governance structure of the United Kingdom. We're going to move away from that, and therefore people in all different parts of Scotland should actually realise that this is an opportunity to end that sort of fear and end that sort of thinking. Some people would say that it's too late to have an oil fund, that the oil is running out. I don't think the oil's running out when there's still 30 to 40 years and major opportunities west of Shetland and even on the west coast. But at the same time, we also have to consider that we shouldn't just wait for the oil to run out. We have to invest in renewables. We'll always need oil and the chemical processing that comes out of it, the plastics, etc. But we've got to cut down on them. So actually it's a good strategy right now to invest in renewable energy and renewables technologies. And so that's what we need to do. How do we do that? I think that over the last few years we've actually seen a situation where the UK government has cut taxes on large oil companies. It hasn't cut taxes for Aberdeen-based Scottish-owned oil services companies, and some of them have had to lay off many dozens of the workers and have seen their profits cut and can't reinvest, etc. But they've actually bailed out the large oil companies. Other nations haven't. Other nations are still getting billions of pounds worth of revenues for producing less oil than they do in Scotland. But the UK government, which controls taxation, has actually cut petroleum revenue tax to zero, for instance. And as a result, that then flows through to Scotland's finances, and it makes Scotland's finances look worse than they should be. Now, it might be that they've had to do that because of the years of mismanagement going up to it. There's been no oil fund in place, etc. But actually what we can see is that the big oil firms are actually declaring big profits. They're declaring £billion profits and paying their shareholders profit dividends. So actually now is the time to slowly and gradually bring taxation back in. It shouldn't harm development, and if it does, then they don't have the skills within these companies to run them properly, because they seem to be managing to develop new fields and invest in new technologies elsewhere where they are paying taxes. So even if you bring it back in gradually, we can then ring fence the monies generated through bringing taxation back into that sector, and ring fence that and put that in an oil fund, and then take that money, which can be then invested in renewables. And I think that's definitely the way to go forward. The economic mismanagement that brought us to this place doesn't mean we should miss the final opportunity to create a lasting legacy from the North Sea and its oil and gas reserves. Yes, I think he's absolutely right. And I mentioned before about Scotland having 25% of Europe's offshore wind and Europe's tidal energy, and 10% of its wave energy. And I think these are quite stunning figures when you consider we've only 1% of Europe's population. And I think that just goes to show the natural wealth of Scotland, and Aberdeen is placed not just geographically, but in terms of the skills that actually are transferable from the oil and gas industry to the offshore renewables industry. I think it's perfectly placed to take advantage of this. It just needs a government, it needs a Scottish government that's going to see it as a priority to invest in, when the UK government doesn't. But I think that we have expertise, we have offshore expertise, etc. I think we have to actually widen the benefits, though, which involves actually fabricating the offshore wind farms here in Scotland. There are many ports, deep water ports. There are shipyards, old shipyards that are not being used, etc. Not just in the Aberdeen region, but throughout Scotland, that could be actually brought back into play, reindustrialise parts of different cities and the towns that surround Aberdeen in particular. Many of them have got facilities that could be used for this. So we've got to actually invest in actually making the actual windmills, in engineering them and fabricating them ourselves. I see that as a major opportunity, as well as decommissioning at the same time, because too much of the decommissioning is going abroad, some to Malta, some to Morpeth, etc. Really, we should be thinking about if the hit to Scotland's finances to pay for decommissioning is hitting only in Scotland, and surely the benefit of decommissioning should happen in Scotland as well. And I think that there's a very close link between the engineering skills required to build and fabricate offshore wind turbines, and also the skills required and the facilities required to do decommissioning. So I can actually see a reindustrialisation of Aberdeen in the northeast of Scotland coming as a direct result of this opportunity. And we already have Europe's largest offshore wind farm, so I think there's a case study in what can be achieved. Well, first of all, I think that coming at it as an economist, you might expect that I would be not so keen on improving workers' rights, improving pay, etc., because people think of economists as being these sort of neoclassical right-wing, this is how business works, this is how the economy works. But I think nowadays more and more people are actually rejecting that thinking, in fact totally and utterly rejecting that thinking. And I'm also seeing that in the businesses that are members of Business for Scotland, because right from the very beginning, shared prosperity has been what we've looked for. So if you look at members of the CBI, for instance, the big PLCs, they just look at the bottom line, whereas Business for Scotland and the businesses that are actually based in Scotland, entrepreneurial businesses owned by people who live here, whose children go to school here, whose families live here as well, they're more invested in the community, and therefore changing the emphasis of the business community from London big finance to entrepreneurial, Scottish-owned, or not Scottish-owned, but Scottish-based companies who are part of the communities that they are surrounded by, means that we'll have different values. We'll lobby for different business policies, different economic policies. And to put it in a nutshell, if you do not pay fair wages and you do not have really good working conditions and safeties in place, then it doesn't in the long term actually help the economy, because you can't have a successful economy without having a successful community and successful society. And you can't have a successful society unless you have a successful economy to pay for the services, the health service, etc., that you require, and for the pensions and the benefits, etc. So actually, it's two sides of the same coin. They are one, and that's what's wrong with politics in the UK. It's so much left or right. So we elect a UK Labour government that says, oh, we've let society down, let's invest in society, but they don't understand how to run the economy. And so the economy starts to dip, and as the economy dips, you can't fund society. And so they go, oh, let's give the Conservatives a chance. So the Conservatives come in and they bring in things like the bedroom tax, etc., and society dips, and as a result, we get people being discontent. And discontent people do things like vote for Brexit. And then, so we're just swinging the pendulum backwards and forwards. And so what we need is a holistic approach, one that understands that it's not society or the economy, it's not right or left, that actually it's only by taking care of everyone that both society and the economy can thrive. And that's what Business for Scotland stands for. And I think that is the biggest difference you're going to see in business and economic policy in independent Scotland, is the realisation that there's a new way of looking at economics. And Scotland's leading that way, Scandinavian countries are leading that way. We talk about well-being, but that's just part of it. And I think we can get really excited about that. But again, it's not about left and right. It's about finding a balance that means society works for everyone and doesn't leave anyone behind. And that's one of my key drivers for actually supporting independence.